Thank you for joining us for another Hagley History Hangout. My name is Gregory Hargreaves, Assistant Director of the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, Delaware. Now, as you know, during these history hangouts, we like to bring you some of the great work being done by folks who have used the historical collections held in the Hagley Library, especially scholars who have received support in the form of research grants and fellowships of different kinds from the Hagley Center. One such scholar joins me today. Denise Sutton is an associate professor at the City University of New York. Denise, thanks for speaking with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Let's start by painting with broad strokes, so to speak. What is it you are researching and writing about?
I'm working on a book manuscript about innovation in the fashion and beauty industries. I started this project just before COVID hit, and I got the book contract during COVID. So it's been a long haul because, of course, all of the archival research that we were all doing basically stopped unless we had access to a digital collection. So I've been working on this project for a long time. And of course, Hagley, the archive at Hagley was an archive that I wanted to check out because I wanted to write a case study on synthetics. And at first, I thought I was going to look at the evolution of athleisure wear in the fashion industry, and I received one of the research exploratory grants. So I thought, okay, I'll go down, I'll see what I can actually contribute to this conversation about synthetics and athleisure, because there has been a lot of really good scholarship on synthetics. And when I came down to Hagley and had a conversation with the archivist when I arrived, I was inspired to look in a slightly different direction, which is, one of the really kind of wonderful things that happens when you're doing archival research. You think you're going in one direction and you have a conversation with an archivist, or you come across some material that inspires you to go in another direction. The book is basically a series of case studies of innovation, what innovation looks like in the fashion and beauty industries. And one of the case studies focuses on the material that I used at the Hagley Archives.
Hmm. Well, before we dive into that archival material, could you perhaps sketch the project in terms of what are your case studies and how do they relate to one another?
So, um, One of the case studies is about Fashion Fair, a beauty brand that was founded in the early 1970s by Eunice Johnson, who was a partner in the Johnson Media Company in Chicago. They published Ebony magazine. Eunice recognized a need in the market for beauty products for women of color. And so she created the Fashion Fair brand. So I look at what innovation looks like in that segment of beauty. I have another case study on Lane Bryant, which is a plus size fashion apparel brand. Lane Bryant, or Lena Himmelstein, is the woman who founded the brand in the early 1900s. She actually started off with maternity wear, recognizing that there was a need for ready to wear maternity wear. And in the early 1900s, we're still dealing with some of these Victorian ideas about what was appropriate um, for a pregnant woman. And if you were a middle class pregnant woman, then you really weren't seen in public. Um, so, as those old Victorian ideas started to change, more and more women were actually going out in public while they were pregnant, and they needed something appropriate to wear. And of course, this is the innovation. Lena Himmelstein recognized that need and started to create maternity wear, and that evolved into plus size apparel. I also take a look at um, upcycling feed sacks. So again, we have an innovation in the way that women were using feed sacks upcycling them basically into household goods. So feed sacks, um, this would have been a fabric that flour or sugar or cornmeal would have come in. And then women were basically reusing that fabric for household goods and even clothes. What's interesting in this case study is there's actually a company that recognized what these women were doing with the feed sacks. And so they actually created different kinds of prints and colors for the feed sacks to kind of draw in the consumer to their particular brand. Um, Another case study is on the sustainable and clean beauty products of Alida and Dr. Hauschka. And those two beauty brands were actually developed out of kind of this reaction to the Industrial Revolution. Um, so both Veleda and Dr. Hauschka, they're European brands, and they're recognized as probably two of the what Jeffrey Jones calls values-driven businesses. They created a new business model basically, and I talk about that in the case study. And then the final case study is the study on the material that I used from the Hagley, which is all about Kevlar and Stephanie Kwolek, the chemist who discovered Kevlar.
Well, let's leap right into that subject then. Why is it Kevlar? How does that fit into the larger study and sort of, or put another way, what was it that put Hagley on your radar as an important stop for this work?
Right. So as I mentioned, I thought I would be going down to Hagley to do more research on synthetics and the connection between synthetics and athleisure wear. Because I would say in the past century, um, there has been this trend towards the casual in fashion. So we've become much more informal and casual in the way that we dress. And athleisure wear fits into that because athleisure wear is kind of like that gym outfit that you wear during the day or that you see people wearing during the day, the tights, the sneakers, um, that whole kind of athleisure uniform. And the main fabric used in athleisure is synthetic. So I was thinking, oh, I'm going to write something about that connection and this trend towards casual. But then when I got down to the archive, I even submitted all of my tickets, for the boxes. I had a conversation with the archivist, and he happened to mention Stephanie Kwolek, a chemist at DuPont that I had never heard of. Um, but all chemists, if you're a chemist, you've heard of her. But
Mhm.
I had never heard of her, and I had never heard her mentioned in um, any fashion courses I had ever taken or any beauty courses I've ever taken. And chemistry is so important to both fashion and beauty in terms of textiles for fashion and in terms of formulations in the beauty industry. So when I heard about this chemist, Stephanie Kwolek, I wanted to find out more about her and what her contributions were um, at DuPont, to the textile industry. And of course, once I started reading about her, I was like, okay, I think my case study just changed topics from, athleisure and synthetics to Stephanie Kwolek and what she did at DuPont, her contributions, and Kevlar, right? So, usually when we're talking about textiles in the fashion industry, we aren't focused on industrial use of textiles. And so I found that really interesting. That's incorporated into the case study, this idea of industrial textiles. So, of course, the bulletproof vest is what most people connect to, Kevlar, but it's also used in like protective gear for firefighters. It's used in um, certain kinds of gear that people have to wear in labs. Um, So, it extends beyond the bulletproof vest. And I also wanted to really explore the corporate culture at DuPont and how that enabled this innovation, right? What did these labs look like? What was the mission of the labs? And what I discovered was um, the research environment in general, research environments in corporations can have, two goals. One can be more of a discovery driven environment, kind of pure science. And then the other can be kind of a market driven environment where they're really thinking about application. Like, okay, how are we going to apply this in the market and how are we going to sell this? Um, I think in the textile labs at DuPont, they were really starting off with more of this discovery driven research approach. And I really saw that with Wallace Carruthers, the inventor of nylon. He was basically recruited from Harvard. And part of the reason that he left Harvard to go to DuPont was he was told, you can have your own lab and you can do whatever projects that you want to do. It wasn't so much about application, right? So I thought that was fascinating. And I incorporated that into the case study. And that also applies to the work that Stephanie Kwolek was able to do in um, her polymer research. And this is in researching polymers, this is how she was able to discover Kevlar. Because with any synthetic textile, you have to basically turn um, a liquid into a string so that you can weave these strings together, right? So I don't want to get too deep into synthetics, but there are basically two kinds of synthetic textiles. One is cellulosic and one is non-cellulosic. Um, True synthetics are non-cellulosic because they don't come from soft wood, for instance, which a cellulosic synthetic can come from a soft wood. But any synthetic has to be turned into a liquid, and then that liquid needs to be able to be made into a string to be woven. And Stephanie Kwolek found a way to turn a polymer into a string that could be woven um, into, what we now know as Kevlar. So that the archive reveals that process. And I don't have a background in chemistry, so I had to spend a lot of extra time trying to figure out, okay, what does this actually mean from a chemical point of view? Um, so that was part of the excitement and fun for me is to learn about this aspect of chemistry and how that relates to textiles. And also just the kind of corporate environment and how DuPont um, encouraged innovation, but also, you know, innovation isn't just about invention. So, Kevlar was an invention, but once Kevlar, was discovered or invented by Kwolek, DuPont thought this could be applied to the tire industry. They thought they had a real market there. And it turned out that Kevlar was just too expensive to produce. And they had to pivot and figure out a different application for Kevlar. So I think that that's also part of the innovation. It's not just the discovery of Kevlar, but pivoting from their original idea for application to, okay, how else can Kevlar be used? And it was really the oral history interviews that gave me a lot of insight into that whole process.
Well, what are some of the physical properties of Kevlar that made it applicable to fashion, to textiles, as a useful innovation, as a marketable innovation?
Basically, it's the strength of Kevlar It's resistance to heat, and it's the most what do I want to say here? It's the strongest textile basically that exists. I mean, it can stop a bullet. Um, and again, it's very expensive to produce, so it doesn't have as big of an application as nylon, right? Nylon is like one end of the spectrum, and Kevlar is at the other in terms of application. So Kevlar doesn't have as many applications as something like nylon, but it is more expensive. And DuPont, and especially one man who was interviewed and who is in the oral history archives, found various applications, including there's one really funny story that I want to make sure I have his name right. Lynn Bell. So Lynn Bell is interviewed as part of the Joseph Plasky oral history interviews, and Lynn Bell came to DuPont to work in the fibers and finishes department. But his job, he wasn't a chemist. His job was to figure out how to market and sell the textiles. Kevlar being, it eventually became his main product to sell. He didn't have a college degree, but he was very smart, very clever in the ways that he figured out how to market Kevlar. He called himself a string salesman because Kevlar would be sold in like a big spool. It was like a string of a string that would be woven, of course, because it's a textile. Um, but he actually would go around and um, and sell Kevlar. He became known as the Kevlar sales person. And eventually he got a call from Sam Walton of Walmart. He got a call from Sam Walton's secretary. And at first he thought it was a joke, right? And but Sam Walton wanted boots made for his hunting dogs. He wanted the boots to be made out of Kevlar to protect the hunting dogs' feet as they were, running through the Texan terrain because he would go hunting in Texas. So that's kind of a funny story about an application for Kevlar. But he sold the Kevlar vests to police departments. He sold Kevlar gloves. That was another idea he had. And these Kevlar gloves went into hardware stores. He worked with, I think it was Ace Hardware, to sell those Kevlar gloves. And I think he was kind of like the the brilliant marketer behind getting the Kevlar name out there.
Yeah, it's such a it's a household name. Everyone is familiar with this, despite the fact that it has this almost obscure origin in high science in the corporate laboratory setting.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is really mostly known for the bulletproof vest, right? But there are all other kinds of applications in terms of industrial um, apparel, I guess you would call it. So it is a segment of fashion that we don't really think about because it is apparel. I mean, gloves are accessories. And the protective gear that someone might have to wear in a laboratory, it's apparel, right? So it does fall under the fashion category, but it's not something that we necessarily think of as fashion.
Hmm. I think that's actually a really important uh, suggestion you're making here that we need to um, broaden our understanding of what constitutes fashion. And I think that there are industrial contexts, workplace contexts where people have to, as you say, wear certain gear. It's almost an equal and opposite movement from the the informal athleisure aspect that you had initially considered looking at, where in public we're more and more informal and free to dress as we like, as it were. But in workplace settings, especially ones with potential hazards, our
Mhm.
choices are much more constrained.
Right. And in that sense, it's almost like the concept of a uniform, right? It's a requirement, but it's really tightly connected to safety, right? If you think of school uniforms, it's a uniform to communicate that you belong to a community, right? Um, it's a requirement by the school. Um, but with this industrial where it's a requirement, but for safety reasons.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, Denise, it's a really interesting project, and thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And for the audience, if you would like more Hagley History Hangouts and more information on the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library, join us online. You can visit hagley.org. That's HAGLEY.org. Don't be a stranger.